I'm Michael Williams, I'm Director of the Wheeler Centre, and I'm very excited to be here talking to Christos Tsiolkas. He's one of my favourite authors, bar none, and we're very lucky to have him here. This is an event the Wheeler Centre is putting on in partnership with Readings, and we're thrilled to work with them and with Alan and Unwin. And I'd like to acknowledge we're on the traditional land of the Wurundjeri people and pay my respects to their elders and elders of any other communities who may be here tonight.
Ditto.
That covers that off. But look, this is hugely exciting. 1995 is when Loaded was published. It's almost 20 years since Christos burst onto the scene and revealed himself as a talent to watch. Revealed himself sounds a little saucy, actually. I should word that differently. And it's been an extraordinary career, going from strength to strength. And his new book, Barracuda, I'm going to say this repeatedly through tonight's session, I think is the best thing he's ever done. It's an extraordinary novel. In fact, I'd like another big round of applause for Christos Tsiolkas before we go any further.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you very much to everyone for being here. I'm quite overwhelmed, really. I was saying before to Michael that my memory of this theatre, I have lots of memories of this one, but is my father taking my brother and I to see Superman all the years ago, and we had to walk right up to the gods, and I just thought it was the most thrilling place I'd ever seen. Like truly, like, you know, magic was coming from the screen, but magic, it seemed to come from up in the heavens as well. So I just can't quite believe it.
How, as a little boy, did you take Superman? Did you want to be up on the stage at the Capitol one day? Did you want to be on the big screen? Did you have those kind of ambitions as a kid?
I wanted to be Margot Kidder, I think.
Good choice.
I actually thought I'm being quite serious. I think I thought of the character, she was the feistiest. I had that experience of going to all those big movies and loving it, you know. I remember seeing Star Wars 4 times with my brother and my cousins. But I do remember, actually not 4 times, maybe it was 3 times, because the 4th time I remember having to make a choice whether I saw Star Wars again and I looked up at what was playing, and there was a film called An Unmarried Woman about I didn't realise, but it was about a woman in New York going through divorce. And that was the best choice I made that day. So I understand both the pleasure of the big spectacle, but from very, very young, also that there was another form of cinema. And
I didn't actually plan to open there, but so much of Barracuda deals with questions of ambition and aspiration. One of the things, you're coming off the extraordinary success of The Slap and well-deserved success of The Slap. You wrote a book that made you a household name. You know, in 1995, when Loaded came out, most Australian readers knew 2 things. They knew that this was a debut by a prodigiously talented writer, and they had no idea how to pronounce his surname. And whereas, by the end of the Slap capturing the public imagination, everyone knew how to say Tsiolkas. And the thing about The Slap was that I heard you say a number of times it was a book about Howard's Australia in terms of the era in which it was set. And one of the underlying themes of Howard's Australia, I think, was that notion of the aspirational Australia and what it was to aspire to advance your own station in life. And it's extraordinary to me the way Barracuda takes those themes and looks at the cost of aspiration and the underbelly of aspiration, which I think is shame. Was that a deliberate transition?
Oh, look, I would no, in the sense that I would be lying to you if I said it was deliberate. That I had sat down and consciously thought about those questions in that way. It's interesting. Last night, Malcolm Knox, who's a terrific writer, was he launched the book, and he was talking about how a writer can't separate their work; they are all one. And so, of course, so many of these questions come in and out of everything I write. But in a way, when I sat down to begin with the slap, I was very conscious that I wanted to write about something called the middle class. And it was because I had, the novel before had felt like it had marked something I'd wanted to say about both the promise and the disillusion of a certain form of politics. So I wrote the slap with that in mind, that I was going to look at the middle class, because I thought that was one way of exploring class in Australia. One of the myths we tell ourselves in Australia is that we are a classless society. That was certainly one of the myths that John Howard and that era propagated. And then this funny thing happened, that the slap became by far the most successful novel I'd ever written. It became, it suddenly gave me an economic certainty. It gave me, it just gave me a freedom, an economic freedom I had never had before, that my partner and I had never had before. And I had been I had been so conscious of asking myself this question repeatedly: am I, and it comes in and out of the slap, I think, am I middle class? How middle class am I? And it wasn't until I finally realised that I am middle class, because that's what the money in the bank is saying, that I thought, actually now I'm going to have the freedom. I actually want to talk about class. I want to talk about working class. I want to talk about what that means, because it doesn't only have to be filtered through Christos Tsiolkas himself. I feel like I can write about that subject because I have been both. I have this precarious position between the two worlds, the working class migrant world I grew up in, and the world as a writer, an intellectual, as a bourgeois man I occupy now. And I thought, there's nothing. Sorry, Michael, I know I'm being long-winded, but I'm just trying to think of the question you were asking. So, there's, at the moment, I think there can sometimes, and only sometimes it works incredibly well, but there can be nothing more boring than writing a book about why a writer wants to do what they do. But maybe putting it in the figure of an athlete, maybe putting it in the figure of a young boy who has these aspirations, maybe then I can say something. Maybe I can create a character that can reflect on all these things, or allows the reader to reflect on these things.
I want to come back to Danny Kelly, the boy at the centre of Barracuda, in a minute, but the thing in that interests me, and I can't quite resist following up on, is if there's any kind of autobiographical reading of any aspect of this book. I'm curious because for Danny, there's a deep ambivalence about leaving his working class roots behind. That feels like betrayal of something he fundamentally is, something he fundamentally believes, and it feels like a rejection of a life that he doesn't want to reject. Do you feel that ambivalence about your self-identified middle-class status now?
Yes, I do. And I don't want to pretend that these things are resolved. I think they're going to be an ongoing. These series of questions will be ongoing throughout my life, and but certainly there's a certain regret I have about that I can't own a space, an identity around class that I still have people in my life who seem to possess, whether they be connected through family or relationships or whatever it is. So yes, I have that ambivalence. Danny Kelly is not autobiographical, and I'm conscious, this book is literally just being released, so you haven't read it. So I apologise that I'm talking about characters and situations you don't know about, but I'll try and be brief, but this goes to your question, Michael. His best friend from really a young boy from primary school is a girl called Emmett, who's they're best friends. And, you know, we see these characters from children to their early 30s. Demet comes from a Turkish background. They're both from Reservoir. She goes to university. She feels, and she recognises, or Danny recognises, that she herself shares his ambivalence. And if there is an autobiographical character in Barracuda, it's Demet.
That makes sense. She's pretty angry.
There's a lot to be angry about. I mean...
No, there is a lot to be angry about. You don't have to justify it.
I mean, you know, it just seemed to me that if I was going to be faithful to a character like Demet, that dislocation from class, that dislocation from family, it's not easily done. It's not. It's a battle, and that inevitably brings with it a whole series of resentments, fury. I don't think she's as angry as Danny, and that may be that she can articulate some of the reasons for why she feels, of how she feels better than he can.
The exploration of class in this book, as has often been the case in your work, is partly centred, the world of sport and the ambition around sport is a big part of it, but education is a kind of central plank of this book. Danny has aspirations to be an Olympic athlete, and good reason to have high hopes for himself in that area, and off the back of that gets a scholarship to a very prestigious private school by the name of Cunt's College. I had to say that on stage at the Capitol because I'm not going to get many chances to say that on the stage at the Capitol. But it's so charged, it's so Melbourne, like it's so familiar, the idea of these golden boys who have these opportunities, and the way in which to have an opportunity, Danny has to surround himself by a world that he so disdains that he gives it this rather colourful terminology.
To explain to people, Danny gets a scholarship to one of the elite Melbourne schools, and his friends in Reservoir call it Cunt's College. You know, that's. I'll let you decide which college it is.
I got a short list.
It seemed to me that it was. That education becomes one of the markers through which some of the ambivalence and confusions we have about class it is one of the markers of what is changing in our society in terms of class. So, you know, the amazing rate of private school education in this country. I wanted to explore that phenomenon. I also wanted to do it. I wanted to do it in a way that was authentic to the character as well. As I said, when I was thinking about writing this book, I was thinking a lot about that experience of going to Melbourne Uni, and what a strange, wonderful, confusing, terrifying, disorientating time it had been. But as I said, I didn't want to write a book about a writer. I wanted to write what happens if you experience that from a very young age? What does that do to your sense of self? What does that do to your relationships with the world around you, to your family, to your friends? And having not been to one of those schools, I had to do two things. One, think back on that experience of first going to university and just suddenly realising that the city I knew was a completely different city. that I didn't realise these spaces existed, that these people existed, these communities existed. That was truly a shock. You know, I thought I knew something about a city called Melbourne. So that was... Oh, look, I'll leave that there for the moment.
Was it inevitable once you started exploring those themes that sport in Australia was the natural kind of natural lens through which to look at this? I mean, our relationship to achievement in this country is flawed and complicated at the best of times, but never more acutely than when we look at the sporting arena, I would have thought.
The sports, what had happened after the success of the slap was that I had felt this immense great fortune, but I also felt this ambivalence and confusion about was I really deserving? Like, let's put it to that. Was I really deserving of this? I think everyone in this room who is an artist or a writer understands that self-doubt, that questioning. And because I am an Australian and sports so dominates our culture, I remember just watching sports on the television and this envy of what I saw then as I called it the cleanness of the sporting achievement. You know, that, and as I've said about it, it's the first one across the line is the best. It's quantifiable in a way that art can't be. And so that's why the sporting metaphor seemed to, right at the beginning of thinking about this novel, that's what I thought, that's why I'll pursue it. And of course, what sports allows you to do is to talk about the culture, because sports so dominates a culture like Australia. Look, there were... Just as with the slap, I didn't sit down and it didn't come from this desire to write a book about whether it was wrong or right to slap a child. That wasn't why I wrote the slap. I really didn't sit down to write Barracuda because I wanted to talk about what it was like to be to win an Olympic or want to win an Olympic medal. That's not really what the book is about for me. It's just that the narrative of an athlete gave me an opportunity to say so much about what I wanted to express about this moment in our culture, this including something that is happening in sports, which is that we idolise these women and men. These really young, let's call them girls and boys, they're really young when they're beginning. We put so much expectation on them. We make them goddesses and gods, and then they do a mistake, and sometimes they are heinous mistakes, I acknowledge that, and we tear them apart. And I also wanted to write that story. I wanted to write a story about someone who fails in what they want to do, who does, out of that anger at self-hatred, does something terrible, and ask, can you be forgiven that? Are you forever to be marked by that mistake that occurred in youth?
That notion of forgiveness is really important in this book. One of the recurring refrains about the slap, everyone read it, loved it, but one of the recurring refrains was, the characters are all so unlikable, they're unsympathetic, I can't embrace the characters and what they do. And Barracuda, in many ways, as a work, is driven by that sense of forgiveness. Characters do terrible things, and there are kind of horrible, shameful moments, but the driving kind of impetus of the book seems to be a deeply compassionate one. Was that a conscious exercise, or was that just how it evolved?
I owe that to the book, to the person the book is dedicated to, and it's a writer, Angela Savage, who's been a good friend for a long time. But Angela and I, have met regularly through the last 8 years. We're part of. We meet regularly to talk about so many things: politics, life, love, everything. But we also look at each other's work, and we comment on each other's work, and we trust each other with the work. And she's a terrific critic, and she posed a question to me right at the beginning of this of my thinking about the book. She said, "Christos, you really think about what things like compassion means, or you really your politics are humanist. Why aren't they reflected in your novels? What are you running away from?" And let me say, she didn't say it quite as harshly as that, but that's. And I actually thought it's a fantastic challenge that Angela has posed, because I think what I was fearful of is being sentimental or romanticising what I think are really complicated and difficult subjects. But what that challenge gave me was when I actually sat down, when I actually started working on Barracuda, actually started doing the actual work, and the actual work's the actual writing. I had a card that simply stated, "This is a story of how to be a good man," and that's a story I wanted to tell. How do you be a good person, which is actually one of the most difficult things to be in this world at the moment, in this life at the moment, I think. So I've got Angela to thank for that. But
No.
I was thinking of the question and thinking last night of what Malcolm had said about, in a way it's one work, it's not the individual novel. And forgive me if I've talked to you about this before, Michael, but it's very hard to go back to an earlier work. So, it's very, I don't read my earlier novels, or I read bits of them if it's, to be reminded of something. But I did, and it came through working for a brief period with the writers on the television adaptation of The Slap, that it was quite an incredible moment. Like, for 3 weeks, there was this novel that was being ripped apart and then put back together again, and I lost, for a brief period, this sense of I am the writer, and just kind of tried to be as objective as possible. And then there was a moment being questioned by those writers that I realised there is going to be a regret that I have about The Slap, and that's that I didn't do an extra chapter, and that I didn't do it about Sandy. Right? And because I think I would have wanted to give her a voice in the novel, like an actual voice, but also because part of the Harry story and the Harry and Sandy story, for me, you can't separate those two, is also the story of, can you forgive someone for a cruelty, something horrific that had happened in the past. So I actually think that was another stream that came into me writing Barracuda. I kind of felt like I had unfinished business.
There's a lovely line somewhere in the book where Danny talks about wanting to be the hero of his own life, and that notion of goodness and is actually, in a way, in this book, more pervasive than any of the other identity politics, that they all play a part. But that notion of goodness and being able to be proud of what you do. And there's something really lovely about reading that. One of the things that I thought of when reading this book, you know, when you're a kid and you read a book and you associate with that book a kind of overwhelming emotional response. And for me, one of the ones I think of more than anything else as a reader is in Great Expectations, when Pip is embarrassed or ashamed of Joe Gargery when he's in his new life and he can't quite make his new life fit with his old life. And I remember as a kid feeling painfully kind of anxious about that. What a horrible, terrible moment of shame. And I felt that moment again in this book, that ambivalence of a young man, young character trying to work out who they are and how that fits with who they've been and what's come before. One of the things for Danny is the books he reads and the influences on him. He has this very rich internal life, and even as his educational environment is letting him down, his reading, he discovers beyond that.
Yeah, it's
circumstances that follow.
It's
school.
Actually after Cunt's College that he becomes a reader.
Yeah. No, don't give them any credit for any of it. I think that's important. Only really on the skids do you learn to read, not at a school like that. But those kind of...
Can I just really quickly, to be fair, I mean, I don't, cliche and stereotype, sentimentality, all those things, as I said, I was fearful of. And so even one of the hardest things to do was I wanted, and it came through the redrafting and also talking to friends who had experience of those kind of schools, and including many people who came from exactly the same background as Danny, or very similar background. And, you know, I didn't want it to be a stereotype either. Luke, another of his really close friends, is someone from that class who is, I think, offers real generosity to Danny. I'm just trying to, it's not as simple or as black and white as that early moment when Danny first walks up the gates, or walks through the gates of that school. Sorry, Michael.
No,
from the question. Yeah.
No, not at all. I'm interested. I'm also interested in your aversion to sentimentality, which I understand, but as a humanist, as a deeply compassionate person, as, you know, one of the undercurrents in The Slap, even when the characters are doing hateful things, is an optimism in the new generation coming up, a belief in the importance of respect for earlier generations. You know, you have things you believe in passionately, and sometimes the expression of passionate belief can be dismissed as sentimentality, or it can be dismissed as... Do you not find a tension there? You know, don't you... I don't know, I'm surprised that you wouldn't want to... Do you feel you haven't worn your heart on your sleeve in the past in your writing?
No, I don't think that is when I'm referring to a fear of sentimentality. I don't necessarily think it's about the heart on the sleeve, but I am suspicious of... What am I suspicious of? I guess I do fear that creating a split, some kind of a Manichaean split between good and evil, that you know, there is total good and that there's a total abject character, is something that I don't like in culture. I don't like in works that I read. I don't like in cinema, in films that I see, because there is something about the contradictions of the actual struggle of how hard it is to be just, of how hard it is to be kind, of how hard it is to be truly egalitarian, that I think is part of the story we need to tell. Otherwise, it becomes, you know, it becomes Superman. You know, I'm not interested in writing Superman.
You'd rather be Margot Kidder.
Yeah, I'd rather be Lois Lane.
Well, you just mentioned egalitarianism there, and one of the really memorable things in this book is one of the characters, Clyde, has a tirade against Australians' belief in their own egalitarianism, and I know that for part of the writing of this book, you went away from Australia and you were based in Scotland for writing it. Clyde's a Scottish character. There's a bit of that distance and that outside perspective on the delusions of our national identity and the way we construct ourselves. How important was that stepping out of Australia to the writing of this book?
Incredibly important. To explain to people, I was offered a residency, a 3-month residency on the west coast of Scotland, maybe an hour and a half northwest of Glasgow. Unbelievably, I would not be incorrect in using the word sublime about some of the territory there. It is just astonishing. What it allowed me to do was actually, when you step outside your culture, when you step outside your place, it allows you to breathe sometimes, and that's what going to Scotland gave me. And I'd been thinking about Barracuda, but I actually started writing it. I actually started doing the writing at Cove Park, where I was. So that was one thing I'm very grateful for, that experience in Scotland. And then, so of course, Scotland became a presence in the book. But the other thing that made that quite appropriate, I think, is that Scotland, and particularly a city like Glasgow, represents something about working class history. It represents, and when I say that, I mean in terms of not only us but Europe, about those industrialised cities of northern Britain were the workshops of capital, of industry. So it was, I'm writing a book about class, and it seemed absolutely right that part of Danny's heritage, on his mother's side it's Greek, but on his father's side it's Scots-Irish from Glasgow. And it just allowed me to show through his relationships with both his parents and his grandparents a way of understanding class, a way of understanding belonging. So Scotland was incredibly important to the writing of this book. Very important.
Now, I do want you to have a chance to ask questions of Christos. So in about 5 minutes or so, the house lights will come up and there'll be microphones there. I mention this now so that you're not too nervous when the opportunity arrives. You can now sit here and not listen to what we talk about for the next 5 minutes and just sit there thinking, what would I ask? This is the moment for that. You wrote an extraordinarily powerful essay that was the cover story for the September edition of the Monthly about Australia's refugee policies. And it was an essay tinged with both anger and despair.
How could it be else?
Well, it hardly could. One of the achievements of this book is it manages to encompass that anger and despair in the state of Australian rhetoric, public life, all of that, but it remains a hopeful novel. Are you less hopeful now than you were when you wrote this novel, or do you have hope that we have better natures than our public life might suggest?
I think I'm hesitating because the things rushing through my head are so complicated, and how do I do them justice? In terms of the political situation, I don't feel very hopeful at all. But part of the work I was doing when I was writing Barracuda, and it comes back to Angela Savage's challenge, was that I actually started, I thought, I don't read only fiction, I read a lot of non-fiction. I try to keep my challenge by philosophy, by history, And I decided that I wasn't going to go to the obtuse, and I wasn't going to go to the identity politics, and I wasn't going to go to the fashionable. But I was actually going to go back and start reading a lot of books that I should have read when I was younger. And I promise you I will come to the... I had encountered these writers before, but Kierkegaard, kind of the philosophy and writing that was about what does it mean to be human. And it had been a long time since I had read someone writing in a language that was both tender and complex about those questions. And so in terms of on the question of what does it mean to be human, I do actually feel terrified but hopeful. Like, I think that we will keep asking ourselves those questions. There will be the relationships that someone like Danny Kelly, someone like Demet, I think what saves Danny, what really ultimately saves Danny, and this is an acknowledgement of my own personal history, is how strong the family is. And that's not that it is ideal, not that it isn't riven by deep tensions and silences, but at the end, there is a community that supports each other, and I hope I have rendered that in ways that are not sentimental but true.
I think you have.
Well, thank you. So
you guys should read it. It's good.
But to go back to the asylum seekers, that was one of the hardest pieces of writing to do. One, because I had to honour an amazing group of people at the Asylum Seekers Resource Centre who have worked tirelessly for such a long time in the face of a political culture that is just getting crueler, more unkind, more stupider. There is no crisis. This is a moment of hysteria in our history, and we know that our grandchildren will look back on it and study it as a hysteria that makes no sense. But it is nevertheless true, and it is changing us and making us crueler and making us less forgiving. And we wanted to do, but I also, the other thing that was hard about that essay is, and it goes back to, not seeing the world in Superman's terms, but that I think we have. Well, I think we, and I count myself as a man of the left, we've just become a little bit scared of the hard work, of the reality of how you change people, how you communicate with people, how you talk about this subject that isn't, in a way that isn't polarising or doesn't put the other person down. I think, I just know in my life it is a conversation I have to have with myself, it's a conversation I have to have with my mother, it's a conversation I have to have with friends, it's a conversation I have to have with neighbours, it's a conversation I have to have with a woman at the deli, because asylum seekers comes up all the time, and the misinformation comes up all the time, and the fear comes up all the time, and the anger comes up all the time, and you've got to try and listen and hear what the anger is about. And I tell you, I would say 100%, it's rarely about any asylum seeker. It's about something else. And that's what I was trying to do with that essay, is ask, what is the something else that we're not talking about?
On that note, I think we might bring up the house lights to give you an opportunity to ask questions, should you have them.
Can I say thank you, Michael? Sorry, I've been very earnest, I realise.
No,
Nice.
don't thank me yet. Audience questions are always where the wheels come off. So we'll see how that goes. Just a pointer, if anyone wants to ask if it was right or not to slap Hugo in the slap, the answer is it was right. So we don't need to dwell on that anymore. That's just me being helpful. But there are microphones in the middle, and you do need to make your way to those rather than expect them to come to you. That's the way society is nowadays. While you're being nervous, I'm going to keep asking questions because I have no shortage for Christos. One of the ways in which you resist sentimentality but deal with that question of compassion and forgiveness in this novel is through a fractured chronology. So whereas The Slap was in multiple perspectives of multiple characters, Barracuda is very much Danny Kelly's story, but we come to him at different stages of his life. So we see consequences often before we see action. We see echoes and resonances before we see initial motivation. And it means that there's something incredibly powerful about seeing him as a little boy and a man trying to come to terms with the kind of man he's become. Was that always part of this story, or did that come later? Did you go back and think, no, I need to take a longer view?
It was actually very, very much there from the beginning, that structure. And that's partly, Michael, because structure is one of the ways I enter a novel. It's just, as all people here who are novelists know, that the work required, it's so easy to get lost in the process, and structure for me is always right. It's something I discovered, thankfully, instinctively in writing my first novel, is how important structure is. But it's not choosing a structure for the sake of it, really. What I wanted to do was, what I hope to be able to do was allow a reader to be and feel the adolescent Danny, to be in his head, to be in his body as well, because he is an athlete, to understand this young, talented, exasperating, selfish boy, as young people, as we all are in adolescence. But then to know that he had become an older man damaged by something shameful, and to not lose sight that the boy and the man are connected. That's what the structure allowed for me.
Don't be scared. I know that was a brilliant question, but you can match it with a brilliant question of your own. Do we have one here? Here comes someone down to the microphone. That's what I like to see.
Thank you. First, I've got to say I read the article in the Monthly and I really loved it. Sent it off to my sister and it circulated. So thank you very much for writing about that. I'm a big fan. I've read all your books, and I'm also a big fan of Alex Dimitriadis. And I just wondered, with Loaded and the character in The Slap on the series, my sisters dared me to ask you if you oversaw the scene where he pulled the paper down in the kitchen.
I am going to just say that I just echo how much I love and admire Alex. As I just think he's such a talented performer. I am not going to take credit for something that's not mine. That's the performer and the director and the writer. So.
I'm just going to say I'm looking forward to reading Barracuda too. Thank you for writing again. Thank you for doing all of the stuff for Melbourne. It's brilliant.
My tip, just to enhance your enjoyment of Barracuda, clip a picture of Dimitriadis on the side of the page. It's got nothing to do with the book, but you'll have a ball. There's another question up here. I promise I won't mock you.
I'm very nervous. Hi, Christos, and hi, Michael. It's a bit loud. Shit. First of all, I absolutely love you. I've loved you for a very long time, major fan. And I absolutely love the way that you explore multicultural Australia, which is really refreshing and something that I'm quite passionate about. And I'd love to know, through this exploration, are you any closer to an answer of what are the things that kind of bind us and make us Australian, regardless of culture, regardless, of race and religion? And yeah, that's it.
Look, that's a good and very hard question. I will tell you something, mate, that happened to me. I was very fortunate. As I said, I'm a very fortunate man. I was in Scandinavia last month in September, partly for work, and then travelled. And one of the reasons I was there was to give a lecture to literature students at the university in Copenhagen, and I had prepared back here this paper, and it literally began. My name's Christos Tsiolkas. I'm a Greek Australian, blah blah, and then and after 2 nights in Denmark, 2 nights in Europe, 2 nights away from here, I crossed out the Greek and hyphen. Not because that is not true, that is part of who I am, but I just realised that I am something that is Australian, and that's every time I'm outside this place, I get closer to understanding what it is. But what I said to those students, and what I think is true, is you can't separate, any of us from the fact that we are a colonial country, that we are founded through a particular kind of colonial history that we still haven't come to terms with. Right from the violence of how this land was claimed from its First Peoples, to the horror of the transport and the convict system, to the hard-fought and terrible stain of the White Australia policy and how that changed with the immigrations. I still don't think we as a nation, and then this is what is the glue maybe that binds us all, have dealt with those histories. I don't know if we've overcome those colonial legacies as yet. So I said to the students, and I'll say that this is what trying to understand what it means to be multicultural, trying to understand what it means to be Australian, feels like an act of becoming. I haven't reached there yet, and I never will. But I think we are all, whatever our heritage, we're all in that process. So it's not, I can't offer you anything more positive than that, but I think that's the glue to trying to understand who we are.
Do you think there's value to that kind of searching for national identity? How valuable is national pride, nationalism as a kind of identifier anyway? Is Australianness something we should strive to pin down, or should we define ourselves more by the complex matrix of other bits?
I don't think that thing I was saying about becoming is at all a problematic thing. I think that's actually can be quite exciting. There's one thing I wanted to, and I don't know how successful I was in the monthly essay, was to say, actually, how can we be scared of immigration? It's been such a positive thing for this country, there are possibilities that we have. Go to Greece at the moment, to see the lack of possibility. That's quite a humbling experience. So, So to answer your question, I don't think we need to work out what an Australian identity is. One thing that I think is troubling for me about Australia at the moment is that we are so insecure about the way that we're not, our insecurity about who we are makes us terribly parochial, and makes us self-defensive in ways that I think are quite ugly and immature. I think that is really true of this nation at this moment. You just have to look at our politics. I'm as happy as any of you to blame Abbott, which I do, and to blame Howard, which I do even more. But there's a whole conga line of suckholes in the Labor Party that I'd like to blame just as much. And I also want to blame myself, and that we've kind of...
Go and say it. You want to blame these people too.
That we haven't actually... Why have we acquiesced to this happening in the way that it has, I think, you know? And part of it does come from that, you know, I think that insecurity about who we are. I don't think we need to answer that in affirmations of nationalism, but I think being less scared of, it seems, you know, that if you don't like it, fuck off, stupidity. You know, you again go to Athens, hundreds of thousands of people protesting a system they don't like. They're angry at their government. They're angry at themselves for what they did. No one is suggesting they are not Greek. The fact that I am critical of so much of Australian culture should not be understood as me not being Australian. That, in that way, we are immature, I think.
Having settled on a sporting subject for this latest book, and you talked about it as a metaphor earlier.
And anyone who knows me, I'm not a...
I find that hard to believe. Renaissance man.
I have a secret longing to be a boxer.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, pugilist, I could see that. What I was going to say is you talked about it as a metaphor before, and you talked about that notion of a clean and tangible success that is denied artists. But it seems to me that part of the case you make so evocatively in this book is that it's a binary. It's either absolute success, it's either the top dais, it's the gold medal, or it's failure, an abject failure. For yourself, at this point in your career, does this feel like success? And if so, what drives you on to the next book and the next bit?
And forgive me if you felt, because, you know, I may have said this, but it's so stuck with me. Oh God, I hope I don't get it wrong. I think when I was younger, that ferocious will to write, you know, I'll be honest. I think I had huge delusions of grandeur. You know that you want to be great. You know, you want to be great, and the sad kind of it's comic really story is that you haven't read enough, you don't know enough, and you may. It's like when, you know, sometimes I'll hear someone say, oh, I want to be like Kafka, and my heart just goes, you can't. I mean, that's once, you know, maybe lucky 2-3 times a century, maybe we get but I'm now I'm turning 48 at the end of this week, and I realise that I'm no longer a young man, so I can't be, you know, and I'm not actually, I don't feel like I've got wisdom yet, so I've got to create a kind of a quiet place where I'll do my work, and I hope that it is, I would love to do great work, but I know how hard that is, but I hope I can do every time good work. That would make me happy. And that certainly feels, I don't know if the word would be success, but it does feel fortune that I have that. Yeah, I mean, does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense because as readers, I think we all feel very fortunate that you have that too. I think you're unmistakably an incredibly thoughtful writer, an incredibly important writer, but I think you're also a great writer, and I think we're very lucky to have you. And the new book is extraordinary. You all have a copy now, which is good. You've got no excuse not to read it. It is signed by Christos, but you could get him to sign it again if you queue after the event.
I'm very happy to.
And just as a way of thanking him, wishing him happy birthday for later in the week, but thanking him for his extraordinary writing and his generosity tonight. Christos Tsiolkas.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much, Michael. Thank you.